The New York Rangers have definitely had a pretty bad start overall to this regular season, and things definitely haven't gone quite as planned, as of course the offense for the Rangers has definitely been pretty questionable and shaky so far to begin things. But this Rangers team has now added on back-to-back wins for just the second time so far this season, and of course they got wins against the Edmonton Oilers and Vancouver Canucks, where the Rangers got a 2-0 win, including an empty net goal against the Canucks, and got a 4-3 overtime victory against the Edmonton Oilers. So the Rangers have added on a couple wins here. They're on a bit of a win streak. Hopefully they can keep it going, but in today's video, we're of course going to discuss how the Rangers have played so far and kind of how they played more so over the last couple games here against the Canucks and Oilers on this little win streak they've got going. And also, we're going to take a look at some of the kind of remaining free agents, as we got another top name, of course, that has come off the board from the potential 2026 free agent class, as the Colorado Avalanche have signed one of their star players to an extension, which means, of course, he will not become available next summer. So there are still, there's going to be some pretty solid names available, but there definitely aren't going to be those real high-end guys, those real elite players, the real superstars that once were thought to be potentially available. Of course, lots of them have now signed their extensions, so what was once looking like a pretty elite free agent class has definitely dropped off quite a bit, but there still is going to be some pretty great talent, so we're going to look at some of those other names as well. So starting off here, we'll take a look at quickly the game against the Vancouver Canucks, and of course in that game, the Rangers got a 2-0 win. One of the goals was an empty netter, but overall, it just was kind of a bad game for both teams. Not a whole lot going in that one. Neither team looked too great or too phenomenal in this game. We ended up seeing Jonathan Quick stop 23 out of 23 shots he faced. He has looked really solid so far this season and definitely looks improved from last season as well. And I think a big part of that is, of course, the defense as a whole has looked a lot better in front of both Quick and Igor compared to kind of how they played last season. So I think that alone has definitely been a big help for not only this team in general, but especially the two goaltenders as well. The defensemen being just all around much better defensively and a whole lot kind of just more sound and reliable. I think it's definitely been a huge help for them. So that's obviously pretty big there, but the offense has still been a bit of an issue. And in that Canucks game, we did see the only goal that wasn't the empty netter scored by, of course, Mika Zibanejad, and it was assisted by Will Cooley and Adam Fox. And of course, Will has definitely had a bit of a kind of rough start to the season, but maybe he's slowly getting things going here, as of course he did get an assist on that actual only real goal in the game against the Canucks, and then he also got an assist in the game against the Edmonton Oilers in that 4-3 win. So he's got a couple points stringing together here. Obviously, he hasn't been too impactful offensively so far this season, but hopefully this is a sign of things to come for Will Cooley, who I think, obviously I was expecting and kind of hoping him to have a pretty big kind of, season once again after having that big step up last season, of course. So far hasn't quite taken that step again, but I do think still should hopefully be able to have a pretty great season overall. And, he's starting to get things going a little more as of recent, so that is definitely a good sign. But in this game against the Oilers, it was definitely a little more entertaining, I would say, than the game against the Canucks, that's for sure. Obviously, they've got a lot of firepower offensively, but I think the team defensively, played fairly solid there. It wasn't a perfect game, but it definitely was not too bad at all. We saw Igor Shesterkin stop 33 out of 36 shots he faced. And the next part I wanted to talk about was the fact that the Rangers still don't have their top guys on the forward side of things, actually getting the job done and really producing at a good level offensively. Goals-wise, obviously this Rangers team has had a pretty big issue for the most part overall, just scoring this season. And, a big part of the goals so far have really come from, guys who you don't really expect to be, top point producers for this team. Right now, the top goal scorer for the New York Rangers is Taylor Radish with 5. He once again in this Oilers game got a goal. He got the tying goal as well, a very important one with less than 8 minutes to go in the third period. He tied things up there at 3. Rangers go to OT and get a 4-3 victory. But the point is, the Rangers' top guys are not getting the job done enough offensively. They're not producing at a good enough level. Obviously, JT Miller ends up getting the game winner in this game against the Oilers. That was awesome, phenomenal to see. But the point is, 3 of the 4 goals scored in this game were not from your top 6 forwards. So obviously, I want to see depth scoring. I want to see defensemen, producing offensively. I want to see bottom 6 forwards producing offensively, but I also want to see the top guys who are getting paid these big bucks to produce offense actually get the job done. And a guy like Panarin has definitely not done near a good enough job so far. And, obviously, I think a guy like, Johnny Brzezinski and Taylor Radish and Braden Schneider all having a goal each in this Edmonton Oilers game, where the Rangers win 4-3. That's nice. But you want to see the top guys really start coming through a little more often. And so far this season, they haven't quite been able to do that. So that is where eventually, if they do start to come around offensively, the top guys do, like Panarin, JT Miller really gets going there. Trocheck comes back and he's healthy and he's buzzing around, and maybe, Mika finds that next step in his game, kind of close to where he was at near the end of last season there. Then maybe we can really start to see this team kind of start to come along here and, really start to pile on the wins, because right now, the main issue has definitely been the offense, and you're seeing some decent offense out of your bottom 6 forwards. I mean, Taylor Radish has 5 goals. He has been pretty unreal this season. Even a guy like Connor Sheary, although he's been forced up into the top 6, he's still producing a little bit there. A guy like Johnny Brzezinski, he gets a clutch goal in this game, the first goal of the game. And, Braden Schneider, he even scores a goal in this one, his first of the season there. Will Cooley got an assist on that, so that was good and all. But the point being, I just don't think we're seeing enough out of these top forwards, and that has definitely been a huge reason on kind of why this team currently is right now on the outside of a playoff spot and looking in. And next up here, let's take a look at the Martin Necas contract extension, which I talked about earlier in this video, how the Colorado Avalanche signed one of their stars to an extension, and that was unfortunately Martin Necas, who I was hoping, of course, was going to hit free agency and was going to become available and, could have been a potential signing for the Rangers. Of course, he ends up signing a new deal, which was not shocking at all. Of course, right now is pretty much the last kind of time players are able to go out there and actually kind of sign these 8-year deals, which Martin Necas did get. He got an 8-year deal with an $11.5 million cap hit per season. So it's definitely unfortunate that he did sign that new deal, but it's not really surprising at all. And I do think there are still going to be some other pretty solid and good players available in free agency, but what was once possibly going to have guys like Connor McDavid, Kirill Kaprizov, Kyle Connor, Jack Eichel, Martin Necas has now come down to players like Evgeny Malkin, Nick Schmaltz, Adrian Kempe, and Alex Tuch. And there are still some really good and solid players, but of course, that's a pretty big difference from guys like McDavid and Kaprizov and Connor and Eichel. So it's dropped off a lot, and obviously we've got a guy like Panarin right now who I think is a pretty interesting case. Maybe he gets brought back, maybe he doesn't. We've got really no idea as of right now, but I'm leaning more towards the side of him probably not coming back at this point, and I think it might not be a bad idea for the Rangers to try and get back some assets and maybe look in a different direction instead of re-signing Panarin, who, of course, it does seem like he wants to get absolutely paid. But this video isn't focusing in on Panarin. It's more so looking at the other free agents as, guys like Adrian Kempe and Alex Tuch and Nick Schmaltz, I do think are great names. And if they do become free agents, that's awesome for the Rangers. But the problem is, I don't know how likely that truly is going to be. I think a team like Utah Mammoth, who, obviously have a decent amount of cap space still, are probably going to look to bring back Nick Schmaltz, and I wouldn't be surprised if they did. He is one of the top players in the entire NHL so far to begin this season. Then you've got Alex Tuch, who, of course, it seems like he kind of maybe wants to stay in Buffalo, which, doesn't happen all often there, so I'm sure Buffalo should and probably will do whatever they can to kind of keep him around long term. And then you got a guy like Adrian Kempe, who also is a really great player. And I do think, I feel like he probably has the best chance out of those 3 there, maybe to get out. I'm not really sure why I feel that way, but I just feel like Kempe might end up, not re-signing, and he very well might end up doing so. And I wouldn't be shocked if he does, but out of those 3 players, I feel like Kempe might just have the best case to actually, hit in the market there. So if he does, I think that'd be nice there for the Rangers. And, I wouldn't be mad at all if the Rangers went out there and, didn't bring back a guy like Panarin and brought Kempe in to kind of replace him. That could be a pretty good kind of swap there, of course. And, we did see the Rangers kind of do something like this earlier, throughout this past offseason, where they shipped off a guy like Keandre Miller, and instead of giving him a bunch of money, like, an $8.5 million cap like he got, they went out there and traded him away, got back a first and second round pick, and Scott Morrow, a very good right right-handed defense prospect, and they obviously used that cap space that they saved to go out there and get Gavrikov. So they basically got Gavrikov plus the assets they actually got in that K'Andre Miller trade, which was a first and second and Morrow. So they pretty much got Gavrikov, a first and second round pick in a loaded 2026 class, plus a pretty good prospect there in Scott Morrow, all for K'Andre Miller. So if the Rangers could do something like that again, where they ship off Panarin, get back like a first round pick and a pretty solid young player, or like a really good young player and some lower tier assets alongside that, whatever it is, you get back a decent package of assets there, and then you, instead of using that cap space on Panarin, use it on someone else as well. That could be a pretty good scenario where you're getting back some good pieces for the future, and then signing a new guy. Obviously, it might not help this team out so much this season, so it kind of depends what spot this team is in come deadline time. But I just think that's an idea, and it's definitely not a bad one if this team actually is able to trade away Panarin, which of course it ends up coming down to him at the end of the day because he does have that full no move clause. But that's pretty much going to do it for today's video. If you have enjoyed, definitely don't forget to click that like and subscribe button for daily New York Rangers content, as I do post a video about the New York Rangers every single day at 10 a.m. Eastern time. And also, definitely don't forget to comment down below your thoughts on today's video. What are your thoughts on the Rangers, kind of how they played in those games against the Canucks and Oilers? And also, what are your thoughts on Martin Necas signing that new deal with the Colorado Avalanche to stay in Colorado? He's not going to hit free agency. And what are your thoughts on the other names that are potentially going to hit free agency with guys like, Kempe, Nick Schmaltz, Alex Tuch? Let me know your thoughts. I'll catch you next one, and let's go Rangers.